If you're a creative professional, an artist, a writer, maybe even someone launching a new product, you know that feeling, that intense focus on the moment of delivery. There's this common story we all hear, the exhibition, the book launch, the premiere. That's the finish line. That's the point where the story finally resolves itself. For an artist, it's often framed as this pinnacle of achievement, the big reward for all the struggle. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sources we're looking at today, they really, really challenge that romantic view. They argue that exhibitions are absolutely not endpoints. They're actually complex instruments, strategic tools inside a much longer ongoing career. So our mission today is to look right past the glamour of the opening night, which is really just one tiny piece of the puzzle, and focus on the structural, the financial, and psychological conditions that shape an artist's work. And we're going to use the practice of the artist W.E.O.R. Oost, that's Bruce van der Jagt, as our case study to really get what positioning looks like in today's cultural economy.
And that framing is so important. We have to start right there with what it means to see an exhibition as an instrument. I mean, essentially, they function as tools. Tools for positioning, for getting visibility, for securing legitimacy, and let's be honest, for survival, especially in such a volatile market.
Survival, that's a strong word.
It is, but it's accurate. And it creates this paradox, right? Exhibitions are obviously vital. You can't have a career without them. But our sources are very clear. They are not neutral spaces. They're not just passive displays on a white wall. They are gatekeepers. They actively shape how your work gets read, how institutions categorize you, and which doors open for you next. And, crucially, which doors might close.
Okay, so if we accept that an exhibition is a tool, then the whole perspective has to shift. We stop asking, what does the show look like? And we start asking, what does this show do for the next 5 years of this artist's career? And when you look at the CV of this artist, you see that strategic thinking playing out immediately. It's across all these wildly different formats, all at the same time. They're definitely not putting all their eggs in one basket. On one side, you've got the classic fine art world. Galleries, major art fairs, like showing the Future Image Lab at places like Art Rotterdam or Unseen in 2026. That gives you market validation.
Right. Electability.
Exactly. But then right next to that, you find them in the international festival circuit. The Short Film Tarot, for example, showed at the International Film Festival Rotterdam, and even the Cannes Short Film Corner. And then you have this other kind of validation, this heavy-hitting institutional nod, like being a finalist for the sculpture tribute to slavery victims, a project with the Louvre and the French Ministry of Culture. That's a completely different kind of legitimacy.
What's fascinating here is just how deliberate it all feels. You can see how these different platforms are being used for different kinds of validation. They're not interchangeable at all.
No.
Think about the different languages these places speak. A film festival like Cannes validates narrative, it validates authorship, and the potential for a broad audience.
A public reach.
Yes. Whereas an art fair validates market value, the physical object, the critical collector base. And then being a finalist for a project with the Louvre, that validates the work's historical and social importance. It says this artist is part of a major civic conversation.
It's like a multi-pronged chess game.
It is.
If you're only in galleries, maybe you get pigeonholed as a market artist. If you're only doing institutional work, maybe you struggle to establish a price for your work.
Precisely. And that's why moving between visual art, photography, and film is such a clear strategy. It's a way to keep your agency visible and, maybe most importantly, to avoid being too easily categorized. Because being put in a box is often a career killer, right? It limits where you can apply for funding, where your work is seen as a good fit. So refusing to be pinned down, that is a survival strategy in itself.
Which brings us to the real weight of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Pulling back the curtain. We have to move past the opening night party, which is what, 1% of the actual work.
If that.
We need to talk about the preparation, the sacrifice. Our sources were so clear about this idea of the invisible labor behind exhibiting. And they don't just mean making the art. They're talking about months, sometimes years, of administrative work, intense negotiations over the space, the logistics.
Insurance, transport.
Right, all of that. And navigating the technical formats and the constant back and forth over how the institution is going to frame your work.
And that's exactly where you see this huge asymmetry between visibility and burden.
Ah, that's a good way to put it.
The audience, even the press, they see the polished result, the name on the wall, they get the cultural experience. But the artist absorbs the massive financial, temporal, and emotional cost to get it there.
Let's talk about that cost. The financial risk must be immense.
It can be. Unless you're a really established name, you're often fronting the production costs, the framing, travel, sometimes even helping pay for the installation, all for a return that might or might not come later from a sale. And the time cost, the hours spent on grant applications and contracts, that's time you're not in the studio.
And the emotional risk, too. Putting something so personal through what can be a really bureaucratic, critical process,
Yeah.
that's a lot of vulnerability.
And to really get a sense of this, there's a fascinating piece of source material we have to mention, the documentary-style podcast series, The Artist, which was actually created by W.L.O. Arrow. It's so crucial because it was recorded in real time. This wasn't looking back years later. It's a document of her life, during the subsidy applications, during the rejections, which are constant navigating all the policy red tape, and the day-to-day prep for the very exhibitions we're talking about.
That's incredibly powerful. So it's like a living archive,
Exactly.
mapping that moment where your personal artistic vision has to be translated into this dry, bureaucratic language just to get a funding body to look at you.
It completely foregrounds the process over the outcome. And in doing that, it documents how precarity has just become normalized in the cultural sector. It shows that getting the money, that's a whole other art form.
So if that process is so full of unseen labor and risk, we have to talk about the contradiction between that symbolic value and the practical impact. Our sources call it the currency paradox. And this is the core problem for so many working artists. An exhibition can absolutely boost your reputation, get you a seat at the table, but it often leaves your financial reality completely unchanged. You can be a finalist for a prize with the Louvre, but that doesn't mean you can pay your studio rent next month.
And that's a fundamental structural flaw. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see how institutions are basically set up to absorb the symbolic value.
The prestige, the PR.
All of it. They absorb that while transferring the financial risk and the labor right back onto the individual artist.
So the institution needs the high-prestige names to validate its own mission.
Of course, to get their next round of funding, the artist provides that cultural capital. But the pressure on the artist is to treat that exposure as compensation. You hear it all the time. This is proof the struggle was worth it.
But prestige doesn't pay for materials or health insurance. So doesn't that create another trap? If you have to take on commercial work to survive, doesn't that compromise your perceived autonomy? Doesn't it make the pure work seem less pure to the gatekeepers?
That is the essential tension, isn't it? And the CV gives us the answer. This artist has to sustain the practice by taking on commissioned practical projects that exist right alongside the prestigious autonomous work. For long-term survival, you see things like an AI photography project commissioned by a regional environmental agency.
The Omgevingsdienst Noord-Ziekeneldegebied, right?
Yes, or a corporate photography assignment for a big law firm like Huthoff Baruma. We need to be clear about what those are. They're survival mechanisms.
They show the duality you need to maintain a practice. You need the prestige for legitimacy and future opportunities.
But you need those commissions for stability and survival. It's a constant high-wire act. And it completely undercuts that romantic image of the artist working in total isolation from commerce.
And speaking of that dual reality, let's talk about control. Who controls the mechanism? Selection is never neutral. Who is it that's doing the selecting? A curator, a festival committee? And what are their expectations? What's their agenda?
Well, when you agree to exhibit, you are, in effect, giving an institution temporary power to contextualize your work. They rate the wall text, they control the lighting, they position you inside their theme. That dictates how critics read you and how future selectors will categorize you.
This is where our sources really emphasize strategic agency. The choice of where and when to show, yes, but also, and this is so important, the act of declining opportunities.
Saying no.
Saying no to things that take more from you financially, emotionally, than they give back.
And that need for control over context is probably what led to this really remarkable structural response from the artist. Instead of just relying on external selection, which means giving up that control, the artist founded Stucking Earthrising back in 2020.
Sitting, that's Dutch for foundation.
Correct. And the source material describes it not just as a studio, but as an artistic production and context platform. And it's focused on projects that, and this is a quote, transcend the individual professional practice.
That's much more than just a collaborative space.
Oh, it's a profound strategic intervention. By creating her own infrastructure, the artist is reframing her own agency. She gets more control over timelines, over the critical context, over the narrative. instead of just waiting for the unpredictable cycles of external selection.
It's an act of strategic autonomy. It's realizing that if the system transfers too much risk, you have to build your own table instead of waiting to be invited to theirs.
Yeah.
This has been a really, really illuminating deep dive. We've broken down this key shift, haven't we? Moving away from the exhibition as a reward and towards seeing it as a strategic decision, a complex, calculated maneuver.
Absolutely.
So for any creator listening, the real question that comes out of all this isn't whether to exhibit. It's why, where, and at what cost. And that cost calculation we now see has to include all of this invisible stuff we've been talking about.
Exactly. We have to name what these exhibitions demand beyond just making the art. They demand negotiation, financial planning, navigating policy, all the things documented in that podcast, The Artist. Which leaves us with a really important question, I think. If the true goal isn't the moment the work is on the wall, but the long-term survival of the practice, how might artists radically change the way they calculate the true, unseen cost of prestige before they even say yes to that invitation? Because that negotiation right at the beginning, not the opening night, that's where the real work and the real risk truly begins.